Bianca Walker had been a ghost for exactly 3 years. And tonight, being a ghost was about to detonate a war. She moved through the dining room of Ravello's with practiced invisibility, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while her mind cataloged threats that shouldn't exist. In her previous life, before her partner Jordan died in what the agency called a training accident, she'd been a military intelligence analyst. She'd learned that danger had a signature, that ambushes followed specific formations, that people preparing to kill moved with a different rhythm than people preparing to celebrate. The party at Table 7 was breaking every safety protocol she'd ever memorized. She continued her rounds with mechanical precision, her eyes tracking the foretop through the reflection in the polished silver serving station. To the other servers, to the manager checking reservations, to the wealthy patrons savoring their wine, she was just another waitress. Forgettable. Invisible. That invisibility had kept her breathing for 3 years while she did something reckless and probably suicidal. She'd been building a case against the people who murdered her partner. Jordan had been embedded in the Alvarez cartel as an undercover operative before someone burned his cover. 2 weeks after he told Bianca he'd found evidence that went all the way to the top, his body was found in an alley at 4 o'clock in the morning. The official report said gang violence. Random. Wrong place, wrong time. But Bianca hadn't believed it. She'd investigated. She'd compiled evidence. She'd spent 3 years learning everything about the organization that had stolen Jordan's life and destroyed hers. And tonight, she was watching something unfold that turned her blood to ice water. The family had arrived at 8 o'clock sharp. An older couple in their mid-60s, an elegant younger woman with dark eyes, and a man whose presence commanded the entire room. Bianca had been clearing the adjacent table when she got close enough to hear introductions. Robert and Catherine, their daughter Elena, and her husband Leon. Leon Hernandez. Everyone in the Eastern District knew that name, though most people had enough survival instinct not to speak it aloud. The Mafia boss who controlled everything from the docks to the Diamond District. Ruthless. Untouchable. Dangerous. But that wasn't what made Bianca's heart slam against her ribs. It was Robert and Catherine Voss. Those names hit her like a fist to the chest. She knew those names. She'd seen them in classified files. 3 years ago, in the final weeks before Jordan died, he'd become paranoid. Started sending her encrypted files, digital dead drops with attachments he made her promise to keep hidden. If something happens to me, he'd said, these might explain why. One of those files had contained a target list, high-value marks, people who owed the Alvarez cartel debts they couldn't repay, people who'd become liabilities, leverage points, walking catastrophes waiting to detonate. Robert and Catherine Voss had been on that list. Bianca's hands went numb around the water pitcher, but she forced herself to keep moving, to stay invisible, to keep breathing through the recognition. Then she saw the second thing wrong. The couple wasn't celebrating. They were performing. Robert's laugh came 3 seconds too late. Catherine's smile never reached her eyes. Every 30 seconds, Robert checked his watch with a kind of precision that suggested a countdown, not curiosity. Catherine's hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. These weren't proud parents enjoying dinner with their daughter. These were people waiting for something terrible. Bianca's training kicked in automatically. She scanned the room with practiced efficiency, cataloging every face, every position, every anomaly. Table 3, 2 men in business suits, but their jackets hung wrong. Waited on the left side. Armed. Table 9, a woman dining alone, but she hadn't touched her food in 20 minutes. Her eyes kept returning to Table 7. Near the kitchen entrance, a man Bianca recognized from surveillance photos Jordan had sent her 3 years ago. Vincent Reyna, the Alvarez cartel's primary enforcer. The man who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Her blood turned to winter. This wasn't a family dinner. This was an execution dressed in champagne and candlelight. The question burning through her mind wasn't if something terrible was about to happen. It was who was the actual target, and how many seconds remained before the trap sprung shut. Bianca looked at Elena Hernandez, laughing at something her father said, completely unaware that she was sitting at ground zero. Then she looked at Robert and Catherine and understood with devastating clarity exactly what the Alvarez cartel had done. They hadn't just threatened this couple. They'd given them an impossible choice: deliver your daughter, or we kill you both. And they'd chosen survival. Bianca had approximately 90 seconds to decide whether to maintain her cover and let 4 people die, or break 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility and step back into the war that had already cost her everything. She made her choice in 15 seconds. When Bianca Walker approached table 7 with a fresh bottle of wine and leaned close to Leon Hernandez's ear, she didn't just whisper 2 words that would shatter his evening. She declared war on the organization that had been hunting her since the night Jordan died. And this time, she wasn't running. Bianca Walker learned to disappear on a Tuesday. It was the day after Jordan's funeral, when 2 men in unmarked sedans parked outside her apartment for 6 hours. The day the agency called to inform her that her security clearance had been revoked pending investigation. The day she realized that whoever killed Jordan had also painted a target on her back and signed it with her own name. 3 years later, she'd perfected the art until invisibility felt more natural than existing. She moved through cities like water, never staying longer than 4 months, never using the same name twice, never leaving a footprint that could be traced back to the woman she used to be. Bianca Walker, military intelligence analyst, top security clearance, partner to Jordan Cross. That woman had died the same night he did. The authorities just hadn't found her body yet. Tonight, she was Emily Chin, waitress at Ravello's, 4th month into a 6-month limit she'd imposed on herself. The uniform made her forgettable. The lack of social media made her invisible. The constant awareness that any moment could be her last made her sharp enough to survive. She'd been watching Table 7 since they arrived, the same way she watched everything, cataloging, analyzing, searching for threats in the patterns others missed. It was exhausting living like this. Always calculating exit routes. Always identifying potential weapons. Always wondering if today was the day her past finally caught up to her present. Jordan used to tell her she had the best threat assessment instincts he'd ever seen. "You see things other people miss," he'd said once, after she'd identified a surveillance team during what was supposed to be a routine dinner. "It's like you can read danger the way other people read emotions." She'd thought it was a gift then. Now it felt like a curse that kept her alive, but never let her live. The restaurant's kitchen door swung open, releasing a burst of heat and noise. Bianca moved toward table 7 with the wine bottle, her mind processing information faster than conscious thought. Vincent Reyna had shifted position twice in the last 5 minutes. The armed men at table 3 had stopped pretending to eat. Elena's mother kept glancing at her watch with the mechanical precision of someone counting down to an explosion. Bianca knew what that meant. She'd seen it before, in war zones and dark alleys where death wore expensive cologne and carried legitimate credentials. Jordan had died because he'd seen too much. Because he'd collected evidence that proved the Alvarez cartel had infiltrated federal law enforcement at the highest levels. Because he trusted the wrong person with that information, and 24 hours later his cover was burned, and his life was over. They'd made it look like gang violence. Random. Tragic. Closed case. But Jordan had sent Bianca the files first. Insurance, he'd called it. Evidence that would destroy the cartel if anything happened to him. Evidence she'd spent 3 years adding to, building a case that would bring them all down. Evidence that meant nothing if she was dead. For 3 years, Bianca had chosen survival over justice. Invisibility over action. Safety over revenge. But watching Elena Hernandez laugh at her father's joke, completely unaware that her own parents had sold her to save themselves, Bianca felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt dangerously close to the woman she used to be before she learned that staying alive meant staying small. She approached the table with the wine bottle balanced perfectly in her hand, her heart beating steady and cold. Jordan had died alone, betrayed, with no one to warn him the trap was closing. Elena Hernandez wasn't going to die the same way, even if it meant Bianca Walker's 3-year disappearing act ended tonight in blood and gunfire. Bianca spent 3 years invisible because no one stood with her when it mattered. Right now, this story needs you to do what others wouldn't: show up. Hit subscribe. Because if you can't support a story about courage with a single click, how can you call yourself someone who values bravery? Don't be the reason good things disappear into silence. Leon Hernandez had the kind of face that made smart people look away. Bianca recognized him the moment he walked through Ravello's entrance, flanked by two men whose suits couldn't quite hide the weapons beneath. The Mafia boss who controlled everything from shipping corridors to city council votes. The man whose name appeared in 17 of Jordan's encrypted files. She'd memorized those files the way other people memorized prayers. Bianca kept her head down, refilling water glasses at table 4 while her peripheral vision tracked his movement. He walked with the confidence of someone who'd never feared anything in his life. The hostess led him to table 7, the private corner booth with sight lines to both exits and reinforced glass windows that probably cost more than Bianca earned in a year. Always catalog the room, Jordan's voice echoed in her memory. Threats come from patterns that don't fit. She started with Leon's security. 2 men positioned near the entrance, standard protective detail. But they were relaxed, scanning the room with routine boredom rather than tactical precision. That was wrong. Leon Hernandez's security should be tighter than a presidential detail. First, inconsistency. Then the couple arrived, Robert and Catherine Voss, according to the reservation. Bianca's hands went cold when she heard their names. She'd seen those names in Jordan's files, highlighted in red with a single-word notation, compromised. They greeted Leon warmly, embracing their daughter with a kind of affection that should have felt natural but looked rehearsed, like actors who'd practiced their blocking but forgotten their motivation. Catherine's smile was bright and empty. Robert kept adjusting his tie with mechanical repetition, every 45 seconds, like clockwork. Fear has a rhythm, her training instructor had said during threat assessment courses at Quantico. Learn to recognize it. People under duress develop patterns. Repetitive movements. Forced normalcy. They're trying to convince themselves they're safe when their nervous system knows they're not. Bianca moved closer, pretending to check the wine selection at the adjacent service station. She needed to see their hands. Hands told the truth when faces lied. Robert's knuckles were white around his water glass. Catherine kept touching her necklace, a nervous gesture that appeared every 12 to 15 seconds. Both of them checked their watches too frequently for people supposedly enjoying a celebration dinner. Second and third inconsistencies. Bianca's eyes swept the dining room with practiced efficiency, cataloging every face, every position, every deviation from normal restaurant behavior. Table 3, 2 men in business casual, but their jackets hung wrong. Armed. They'd ordered appetizers 20 minutes ago and hadn't touched them. Table 9. A woman dining alone, her food growing cold while her attention fixed on table 7 with predatory focus. Fourth, fifth, and sixth inconsistencies. When you see one anomaly, it's a coincidence, Jordan used to say. 2 anomalies, it's a pattern. 3 or more, it's an operation. Then Bianca saw the face that turned her blood to ice. Vincent Reyna sat near the kitchen entrance, partially obscured by an ornamental palm. She'd spent months studying surveillance photos Jordan had compiled before he died. Reyna was the Alvarez cartel's primary enforcer, the man who made problems disappear with clinical efficiency. The man whose name appeared in the coroner's report on a federal prosecutor who died in a home invasion 3 months before Jordan's murder. Terror slammed into her chest like a physical blow. They were here. After 3 years of running, of hiding, of disappearing into anonymity, the Alvarez cartel was 15 feet away from her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab her emergency bag from her locker and disappear into the night, to become someone else in a different city by morning. But her training, the part of her that Jordan had shaped into something sharp and analytical, forced her to think past the fear. If Reyna was here, it wasn't for her. He didn't know Emily Chin, the waitress. He was hunting bigger prey. Bianca's eyes tracked back to table 7. To Leon Hernandez laughing at something his father-in-law said. To Elena touching her mother's hand with genuine affection. To Robert and Catherine, their terror masked behind champagne and for celebration. The pieces assembled with devastating clarity. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a delivery. Robert and Catherine hadn't come to celebrate with their daughter. They'd come to serve her up to the people who owned their debts and their fear. And in approximately 90 seconds, when Raina gave the signal and the armed men at tables 3 and 9 made their move, for people were going to die in a coordinated assassination that would look like a Mafia hit gone wrong. Bianca had exactly one choice to make: stay invisible and let it happen, or step into the light and declare war on the organization that had already destroyed her life once. She picked up the wine bottle and made her decision. Bianca's hands didn't shake as she approached table 7. 3 years of living as a ghost had taught her that hesitation was the difference between survival and a closed casket. She'd already made her choice. Now she just had to execute it before the bullets started flying. She moved with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd perfected being overlooked, the wine bottle balanced in her left hand while her right slipped into her apron pocket. The napkin she'd scribbled on 30 seconds ago felt like it weighed 10 pounds. 3 lines. 19 words. The kind of information that would either save 4 lives or get her killed in the next 2 minutes. 3 exits blocked. Raina, northwest corner. In-laws compromised. Trust nobody. Leon was mid-sentence when she arrived, something about quarterly projections that was clearly a cover for whatever business he actually conducted. His security detail tracked her approach with bored efficiency. Just another waitress refilling glasses, completely beneath their threat assessment threshold. That invisibility was about to evaporate like gasoline on fire. "Excuse me, Mr. Hernandez," Bianca said, her voice low and steady. She leaned in close, her lips nearly touching his ear, her body angled to block the table's view of what she was doing. "Leave now." 2 words. Quiet as a breath. Heavy as a death sentence. Leon's entire body went rigid. His hand froze halfway to his wine glass. Professional instinct, the kind that kept dangerous men alive in dangerous worlds, made him not react, not turn, not give away that anything had changed. Bianca placed the wine bottle on the table and let the folded napkin slip from her fingers onto his plate, covering the movement by reaching for his glass. Her eyes cut deliberately to the northwest corner, to Vincent Reina, then back to Leon. The universal language of tradecraft. See the threat. Understand the danger. Move. Leon's eyes followed her signal, and something cold and lethal flickered across his face. Recognition. Calculation. The instant transformation from family man to apex predator. His hand moved to the napkin, unfolding it with casual precision while Bianca poured wine she knew he wouldn't drink. She watched his eyes track across the words, watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, watched him glance at his in-laws with a kind of look that could strip flesh from bone. "How long?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. 60 seconds. Maybe less. Elena was laughing at something her mother said, completely oblivious. Catherine's hand trembled as she reached for her champagne. Robert checked his watch for the 14th time. Leon's hand moved beneath the table, a signal to his security detail so subtle Bianca almost missed it. Both men straightened immediately, their boredom evaporating into lethal focus. "When I move," Leon said quietly, his lips barely moving, "you move. Understand?" Bianca nodded once. She'd stepped into the light. There was no going back to invisible now. Then she saw it. The man at table 3 reaching inside his jacket. The woman at table 9 standing slowly, her hand disappearing into her purse. Vincent Reina shifting forward in his seat, his eyes locked on Leon with predatory intensity. The trap was closing. "Now," Bianca said. Everything happened at once. Leon surged to his feet, pulling Elena down and back in the same movement. His security detail drew weapons with practiced speed, already moving to form a protective barrier. Robert and Catherine froze, their faces draining of color, guilt and terror written in equal measure across their features. The man at table 3 cleared his jacket, metal glinting in the soft restaurant lighting. Vincent Reina's hand came up holding a pistol. The woman at table 9 screamed, now, into the sudden chaos. And Bianca Walker, who'd spent 3 years perfecting the art of being nobody, kicked over the wine service station, sending bottles and glasses crashing across the floor in a cascade of obstacles and noise, buying them precious seconds as the first gunshot shattered the expensive silence of Ravello's dining room. Crystal exploded. Patrons screamed. Chairs overturned. The restaurant erupted into a war zone, and the ghost who'd tried to disappear found herself in the center of the violence, already moving, already calculating, already fighting for lives that weren't hers to save. But she was saving them anyway, because some things mattered more than staying invisible. The second gunshot hit the wall 6 inches from Elena's head, spraying plaster and decades-old paint across the white tablecloth. Leon had her on the ground before the third shot fired, his body covering hers while his right hand came up with a weapon that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Bianca was already moving. The assassin from Table 3 had tunnel vision, focused entirely on Leon, committed to his shot, oblivious to threats from his periphery. Classic tactical error. Bianca grabbed the heavy wine bottle she'd just poured from and swung it in a tight arc that connected with his temple. He went down hard, his pistol clattering across marble floor slick with spilled wine and broken crystal. She had the gun in her hand before his body finished falling. Chaos bloomed through Ravello's like a virus. Patrons screaming, diving under tables, scrambling toward exits that Bianca knew were already blocked. The woman from Table 9 fired twice toward Leon's position, but his security detail returned fire with professional precision, forcing her behind an overturned table. Vincent Reyna was moving through the confusion like smoke, his weapon up, his path calculated to cut off any escape route toward the front entrance. Robert and Catherine Voss remained frozen at Table 7, their faces drained of color, caught between horror and something that looked disturbingly like resignation. Not the shock of innocent bystanders caught in violence. The paralysis of people watching a plan unfold exactly as they'd been told it would.
Guilty.
They were guilty, and they knew what was coming because they'd helped orchestrate it. Kitchen. Bianca shouted over the gunfire, already pulling Elena to her feet while Leon covered their movement. His security team was trying to push through the front entrance, but more gunfire erupted from that direction. Reinforcements the Alvarez cartel had positioned outside. They were boxed in, exactly as planned. But the cartel didn't know about the service tunnels. The underground passages that connected Ravello's to 3 other buildings on the block, remnants of Prohibition-era smuggling routes that the restaurant's owners had never bothered to seal. Bianca knew because she always knew the exits, always mapped escape routes, always assumed the worst. 3 years of paranoia had just become their only chance at survival. She led them through the kitchen while bullets punched through the swinging doors behind them. Chefs and line cooks scattered, ducking behind industrial stoves and steel prep tables. Leon kept Elena moving, one hand on her back, the other holding his weapon steady. Robert and Catherine stumbled after them, and Bianca wanted to leave them, wanted to let them face the consequences of their betrayal, but Leon's hand shot out and grabbed Catherine's arm, hauling her forward with brutal efficiency. "Move," he snarled, and the single word promised future reckoning. Bianca hit the door to the dry storage room, then the false panel at the back that looked like solid wall but gave way under pressure. Cold air rushed up from darkness below, the tunnel entrance, stone steps descending into blackness that suddenly felt like salvation. "Down," she commanded, and they poured into the narrow stairwell just as Vincent Reyna burst through the kitchen doors behind them, his weapon tracking, his eyes finding Bianca's for one frozen moment of mutual recognition. She fired twice, forcing him back, then slammed the panel shut and drove the emergency bolt home, 30 seconds of barrier between them and professional killers. They ran into darkness, while bullets hammered against reinforced steel above them, and Bianca Walker led a Mafia boss and his betrayed family through tunnels she'd memorized months ago because she'd always known this moment would come. Just not like this. Never like this. The tunnel spit them out in the basement of a luxury apartment building 3 blocks from Ravello's. Bianca had mapped this exit months ago, but never expected to use it while fleeing professional assassins with a Mafia boss and his family. Leon made 2 phone calls in rapid succession, his voice clipped and lethal, and within 8 minutes a convoy of black SUVs materialized like they'd been waiting in the shadows. They drove in tense silence through streets that blurred into anonymity, Elena pressed against her husband's side, trembling but silent. Robert and Catherine sat across from them, their hands clasped together, their faces ashen masks of guilt and terror. Nobody spoke. The questions were too big and too dangerous for a moving vehicle. Leon's safe house turned out to be a fortified penthouse in the financial district, the kind of property that didn't officially exist on any registry. Armed security swept them inside, and the moment the reinforced door locked behind them, Leon's entire demeanor shifted from protective husband to something cold and calculating. Separate rooms, he told his security team, gesturing to Robert and Catherine. Don't let them speak to each other. Don't let them make calls. Don't let them breathe without me knowing about it. The couple was escorted away, Catherine's protests dying in her throat when she saw the look on her son-in-law's face. Elena sank onto a leather couch, her hands shaking, her eyes distant with shock. Then Leon turned to Bianca, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Who the fuck are you? His weapon was still in his hand, not quite pointed at her, but close enough to make the threat clear. And you have exactly one chance to tell me the truth. Bianca had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it during the entire sprint through the tunnels. She met his eyes without flinching, her own stolen weapon hanging loose at her side. My name is Bianca Walker. Former military intelligence, signals analysis, and threat assessment. 3 years ago, my partner Jordan Cross was murdered by the Alvarez cartel after he collected evidence of their federal law enforcement infiltration. She spoke with clinical precision, the way she'd been trained to deliver briefings. They framed me as his accomplice, burned my security clearance, and tried to kill me. I've been underground ever since. Why should I believe you? Because I just saved your life when I could have walked away. Because I recognized Vincent Reyna the moment he walked into that restaurant. Because I've spent 3 years studying the Alvarez cartel's operations, and I know their playbook better than they do. She paused, letting that sink in. And because your in-laws are on a target list my partner compiled before he died. They owe the cartel money. A lot of it. Leon's jaw tightened, but his weapon lowered fractionally. How much? The file said $700,000 3 years ago. With their interest rates. Bianca shook her head. Probably close to $1 million now. Elena made a small, broken sound from the couch. Leon's hand clenched around his weapon, knuckles white with barely controlled rage. A door opened, and a man in his 30s entered, laptop under his arm, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged here. Boss, tech is set up. What do you need? Everything, Leon said, his voice deadly quiet. Financial records for Robert and Catherine Voss going back 5 years. Phone logs. Security footage from Ravello's. Bank accounts, credit cards, hidden assets, shell companies. I want to know every breath they've taken, every dollar they've spent, every lie they've told. The tech specialist nodded and set up his equipment on the dining table, fingers already flying across the keyboard. Leon looked at Bianca, assessment and calculation warring in his eyes. You know their operations. You recognize the setup. You saved my wife. He holstered his weapon slowly. That buys you a conversation. But if you're lying, if this is some elaborate play, I will find out. And you won't live long enough to regret it. I'm not lying, Bianca said simply. I'm just tired of running. Then sit down. Leon gestured to the table where his tech specialist was pulling up files. Because we're about to find out exactly how deep this betrayal goes. The evidence assembled itself with brutal efficiency on the tech specialist's screen, each revelation worse than the last. Bianca stood behind Leon, watching the digital autopsy of a family's destruction unfold in bank statements and surveillance footage. Casino debts, the specialist said, pulling up transactions from a cluster of establishments in Atlantic City. Started small 4 years ago. Poker, blackjack, some high-stakes baccarat. But the pattern shifts 18 months ago. The losses accelerate. They're not gambling anymore. They're bleeding. The numbers scrolled past. 5,000, 20,000, 50. Each withdrawal larger than the last, each loss more desperate. By the time the cascade stopped, the total sat at $853,000.
Jesus Christ, Leon Breated.
The specialist opened another window. The casinos trace back to shell companies. 3 layers deep, but they all connect to the same entity. He pulled up corporate filings, ownership documents, financial trails that wound through offshore accounts and dummy corporations. Alvarez Holdings. Every single one. Bianca's hands clenched. She'd suspected, but seeing the proof felt like vindication and horror in equal measure. They weren't just gambling. They were being hunted. The cartel let them win just enough to keep them coming back, then trapped them. Gets worse, the specialist said, pulling up a new folder. Email account registered to Robert Voss. Look at the dates. The messages appeared on screen, each one a tightening noose. 3 months ago, your debt has been purchased. Payment arrangements will be discussed. 2 months ago, your financial situation requires immediate resolution. We'll be in touch. 6 weeks ago, your daughter is beautiful. It would be unfortunate if anything happened to her. Then came the photos. Elena leaving her gym. Elena at a coffee shop. Elena entering this very building, taken with telephoto precision, each image stamped with GPS coordinates and timestamps. Professional surveillance. Meticulous documentation. Proof that they could reach her anytime they wanted. The final photo made Bianca's stomach turn. Elena through a restaurant window, digital crosshairs superimposed over her face. The message below was 3 words. We own you. Leon's hand slammed onto the table hard enough to rattle the laptop. Elena, watching from the couch, made a sound like something breaking inside her chest. There's more, the specialist said quietly, pulling up security footage. This is from a parking garage in Lower Manhattan. 2 weeks ago. The grainy video showed Robert and Catherine meeting with Vincent Reyna. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. Robert's body language screamed desperation, hands gesturing wildly, shoulders hunched. Catherine stood frozen, barely moving. Reyna spoke calmly, pointing at something on his phone, probably the photos, then handed Robert a piece of paper. Second meeting was 5 days ago. The specialist continued, loading another file. Same location. This footage showed a shorter interaction. Reyna did most of the talking. Robert and Catherine simply nodded, their faces hollow with defeat. At the end, Reyna shook Robert's hand, a gesture that looked more like sealing a contract than offering comfort. Final communication came yesterday, the specialist said, opening one last message. Encrypted, but not well enough. The text was clinical in its brutality. Revelos. Friday 8 p.m. Table 7. Bring your daughter. Celebrate her birthday. When Reyna gives the signal, you leave through the front entrance. Do not look back. Do not warn her. Your debt will be cleared and you will live. Deviate from these instructions, and we kill you both. Then her. Then everyone you've ever loved. Confirm receipt. Below it, sent at 2:47 a.m., was Robert's reply. Confirmed. The room fell into suffocating silence. Elena's breathing had gone ragged, each inhale sharp and broken. Leon stood motionless, staring at the screen like he could burn the words away through sheer force of will. Bianca understood the mathematics of impossible choices. She'd seen what the Alvarez cartel did to people who defied them. She'd watched Jordan die for trying. But understanding didn't make this any easier to witness. They sold me, Elena whispered, her voice small and shattered. My own parents sold me to save themselves. They were given a choice no parent should face, Bianca said quietly, though the words felt inadequate against the weight of betrayal filling the room. Leon turned away from the screen, his face a mask of cold fury barely containing volcanic rage. Bring them in. Both of them. Now. Robert and Catherine entered the room like prisoners approaching execution. Their hands weren't bound, but they moved with the defeated shuffle of people who'd already accepted their judgment. Elena stood when she saw them, her body rigid, her face a landscape of devastation and rage. How long? Elena's voice cracked on the second word. How long did you know? Catherine's face crumpled. Baby, please. Don't call me that. Elena's words came out like shattered glass. How long did you know they were going to kill me? 3 months, Robert whispered. They gave us 3 months to arrange everything. The admission hung in the air like poison. Elena swayed slightly, and Leon's hand moved to steady her, but she pulled away from him, from everyone, isolating herself in her grief. They showed us pictures, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. You sleeping in your bed. You at the market. You having coffee with your friends. They knew everything. Where you lived, where you went, who you loved. They said if we didn't cooperate, they'd make you suffer before they killed you. So you decided to deliver me instead? Elena's laugh was broken and terrible. You chose that. They promised. Robert's voice failed. He tried again. They said you'd just be leverage. That Leon would negotiate, pay them off, and you'd be returned safely. They said nobody had to die. And you believed them? Bianca spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the emotional chaos with cold analysis. You believed the cartel that trapped you with rigged games and manufactured debt? You believed the organization that puts crosshairs on photographs of sleeping women? Robert collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. We wanted to believe them. God help us, we needed to believe them because the alternative was, his voice broke completely. The alternative was both of us dead. Catherine finished, her words barely audible. And then they'd still take Elena. They made that very clear. If we died refusing, they'd just kill her anyway. At least this way, we thought, we hoped. You hoped wrong, Leon said, his voice like ice over steel. They were going to execute her in front of me, then kill me while I watched her die. Your cooperation gave them that opportunity. Elena made a sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream. Her parents had weighed her life against their own and chosen themselves. The mathematics were simple. The betrayal was absolute. What do we do with them? Leon asked, looking at Bianca with unexpected deference. You know this organization. You understand their methods. Bianca studied the broken couple before her. She thought about Jordan, who died fighting the cartel. She thought about impossible choices and the weight of survival. She thought about 3 years of running because she'd chosen justice over safety. They're victims and perpetrators both, she said finally. The Alvarez cartel specializes in creating exactly these situations, forcing people to destroy what they love to save themselves. It's their favorite weapon. She paused, meeting Elena's devastated eyes. But understanding why they did it doesn't erase what they did, doesn't heal what they broke. So what's the answer? Leon pressed. Accountability, Bianca said quietly. They live, but they pay. They work off every dollar of that debt under your supervision. They spend whatever years they have left trying to earn back even a fraction of what they destroyed tonight. She looked at Robert and Catherine. And they live knowing their daughter may never forgive them. That's their sentence. That's their justice. Elena turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her parents had chosen survival. Now they'd spend the rest of their lives wondering if it was worth the cost. The war room took shape over the next 6 hours. Leon's dining table became ground zero for systematic destruction, covered in laptops, printed documents, and hand-drawn organizational charts that looked like anatomical diagrams of a monster. Bianca spread 3 years of accumulated intelligence across the surface, encrypted files Jordan had died protecting, surveillance notes she'd compiled from a dozen cities, financial patterns she'd mapped while living in the shadows. Every piece of information she'd gathered while running, now weaponized into something that could strike back. The Alvarez cartel operates on 3 pillars, she said, marking the whiteboard Leon's team had brought in. Financial infrastructure, distribution networks, and political protection. Take out one, the others compensate. Take out all 3 simultaneously, and the entire structure collapses. Leon studied the web of connections she'd drawn, his eyes tracking the lines of power and money that formed the cartel skeleton. You've been documenting this for 3 years? I've been surviving for 3 years, Bianca corrected. Documentation was insurance. Proof that Jordan died for something real, something that could be stopped if the right person ever had the courage and resources to act. And you think I'm that person? I think you're a man whose wife was just sold by her own parents to the people who wanted you dead. I think rage makes excellent fuel for vengeance. She met his eyes. And I think you have something I don't, an army, connections, and the kind of power that can move mountains when properly motivated. Leon's smile was cold and sharp. What do you need? Everything you've got. Manpower, financial leverage, federal contacts who owe you favors, and absolute commitment to seeing this through. Bianca pulled up a digital map on her laptop. The cartel has 7 key lieutenants, 12 distribution hubs, and financial assets hidden across 43 shell corporations. Their political protection comes from 6 compromised officials and 2 federal agents on their payroll. You have names. I have everything. Names, addresses, bank accounts, communication patterns, security vulnerabilities. She opened file after file, each one a roadmap to destruction. Jordan died building this case. I spent 3 years expanding it. Now we use it. Leon called in his top people, security specialists, financial investigators, former military contractors who understood wet work and didn't ask questions. They assembled around the table like surgeons preparing for a complex operation. 10 days, Bianca said, laying out the timeline. We hit them systematically, precisely, giving them no time to regroup or retaliate. Day 1 through 3, we freeze their financial assets. Day 4 through 6, we eliminate key leadership. Day 7 through 8, we burn their distribution networks. Day 9, we expose their political protection. Day 10, we end Vincent Reina and deliver the evidence to authorities who aren't compromised. Ambitious, one of Leon's men said. Necessary, Bianca countered. Give them time to adapt and we lose. Speed and overwhelming force. That's how we win. Leon studied the plan, his fingers drumming against the table in calculated rhythm. Then he looked up at his assembled team, at Bianca with her 3 years of ghost-like preparation, and nodded once. We move at dawn.
No merci, no hesitation, no survivors.
He turned to Bianca. You've been running alone for 3 years. Not anymore. Now you've got an army. Bianca felt something shift in her chest. The weight of isolation lifting, replaced by something fiercer and more dangerous. Purpose.
Alliance.
The possibility that Jordan's death might finally mean something beyond loss. Then let's make them pay for every life they've taken, she said quietly. Starting with my partner. Ending with their empire. Underscore 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 underscore. Listen, Bianca spent 3 years alone, hunted, invisible, waiting for someone to care enough to act. Jordan died because no one stood with him when it mattered. Right now, this story needs what they never had, people who show up. Hit subscribe and prove you're not the kind of person who watches injustice from the sidelines. Because if you can't support a story about courage with a single click, how can you call yourself someone who values justice? Don't let this disappear into silence like Jordan did.
Subscribe now.
Day 1 started at 4:47 a.m. when 23 bank accounts across 6 states simultaneously locked. The Alvarez cartel woke to find $18 million frozen solid, their operating capital transformed into digital ice they couldn't touch. Leon's financial contacts, bankers who owed favors or feared exposure, executed the freezes with clinical precision. By noon, the cartel's cash flow had stopped like a heart attack. Day 2 brought the shell corporations crashing down. Federal auditors, fed anonymous tips with irrefutable documentation, descended on 43 businesses that existed only on paper. Bianca's 3 years of mapping paid dividends as each corporate veil dissolved under scrutiny, revealing money laundering operations and tax fraud that would take prosecutors years to fully unravel. Day 3 sealed the financial coffin. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, accounts the cartel thought were untouchable, received subpoenas from international banking authorities. The money didn't just freeze. It evaporated into legal limbo. The Alvarez cartel was suddenly running an empire with empty pockets. Day 4 turned bloody. Miguel Alvarez, the cartel's second-in-command, died in what police called a home invasion. His security detail found him in a study with a bullet in his head and no sign of forced entry. Leon's contractors moved like ghosts, leaving no evidence, no witnesses, no trails. Day 5 and 6 brought federal arrests. 3 lieutenants found themselves in custody on charges ranging from racketeering to murder conspiracy. The evidence appeared from nowhere: wiretaps, financial records, testimony from witnesses who'd been too terrified to speak until suddenly they weren't. Bianca's FBI contacts, the few Jordan had trusted before he died, moved the pieces into position with bureaucratic efficiency. Day 7 painted the night orange. Distribution hubs in Newark and Philadelphia burned simultaneously, warehouses full of product turning to ash and chemical smoke. Fire investigators would blame electrical faults and poor storage practices. Leon's people knew better. Day 8 eliminated 2 more distribution centers and a shipping operation at the docks. The cartel supply chain collapsed into chaos, leaving street-level dealers scrambling and desperate, turning on each other when the product stopped flowing. Day 9 brought the political reckoning. 6 compromised officials woke to find their dirty secrets delivered to investigative journalists and internal affairs divisions. 2 federal agents on the cartel's payroll received transfer orders to Alaska, their careers effectively ended by anonymous complaints backed with documentation they couldn't dispute. Day 10 was personal. Vincent Reyna died harder than the others. Leon's team took him alive from his apartment, transported him to a location that didn't officially exist, and sat him in front of a camera. Bianca asked the questions. Leon provided motivation. Reyna confessed for 47 minutes. Names, dates, methods, murders. He described Jordan's death in detail, confirmed the frame-up, admitted to 17 other executions. When he finished, Bianca played the recording back for him. This goes to every federal prosecutor, every journalist, every law enforcement agency that isn't compromised. Your empire dies tonight. Your name becomes synonymous with failure. Reyna's face went pale. You can't. We already did, Leon said quietly. By dawn of day 11, the Alvarez cartel existed only in arrest warrants and evidence files. Their leadership was dead or incarcerated. Their money was frozen or seized. Their distribution networks were ash. Their political protection had evaporated. 10 days of surgical precision had dismantled an organization that had operated with impunity for 2 decades. Bianca stood in Leon's war room, staring at the whiteboard covered in crossed-out names and completed objectives. 3 years of running. 3 years of hiding. 3 years of waiting for justice that never came. Until she stopped waiting and made it happen herself. It's done, Leon said, standing beside her. Jordan would have liked this ending, Bianca replied softly. What will you do now? She looked at the evidence of systematic destruction, at the proof that some fights were worth stepping into the light for, and smiled for the first time in 3 years. Whatever comes next. The morning after Vincent Reyna's confession went public, Leon made Bianca an offer over coffee that tasted like expensive Italian roast and new beginnings. I need someone who sees threats before they materialize. Someone who understands how organizations like the Alvarez cartel think, how they move, how they die. He set his cup down with deliberate care. I need you to stop hiding and start building something that matters. Bianca had spent 3 years as a ghost, and ghosts didn't accept job offers from Mafia bosses. But she wasn't a ghost anymore. The moment she'd whispered, "Leave now," into Leon's ear at Ravello's, she'd stepped back into the world of the living. There was no going back to invisible now. Strategic advisor, she said, testing the words. That's a generous title for someone who's technically still wanted for crimes she didn't commit. Those charges disappeared 2 days ago, Leon replied with the casual confidence of someone who moved bureaucratic mountains regularly.
Federal Prosecutor me a favor.
Your record is clean. Officially, you've been working undercover for a private intelligence firm investigating cartel activity. The Reyna confession corroborates everything. Bianca felt something unlock in her chest, a tension she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it was there. Clean record. Real name. The possibility of existing in daylight without constantly checking over her shoulder. I accept, she said simply. Leon smiled.
Good.
Because we have work to do. Underscore 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 underscore. Elena's healing moved slower, more fractured, like bones knitting back together after a devastating break. She started therapy the following week, twice weekly sessions with a trauma specialist who understood family betrayal in ways textbooks couldn't teach. The first month, she couldn't be in the same room as her parents. The second month, she could tolerate their presence for brief, supervised conversations. Robert and Catherine worked under Leon's oversight now, their lives dedicated to repaying the debt that had nearly destroyed their daughter. Robert managed logistics for Leon's legitimate shipping operations. Catherine handled administrative work that kept her visible and accountable. They lived in a modest apartment Leon provided, their former luxury stripped away, their freedom conditional on demonstrated loyalty. Do you think she'll ever forgive them? Bianca asked Leon one evening, watching Elena leave another therapy session with exhausted eyes. I think she'll learn to live with what they did, Leon said carefully. Forgiveness might be too much to ask. Understanding might be enough. It wasn't justice in the clean, satisfying way movies portrayed it. But it was honest, messy, and complicated, and human in ways that perfect endings never were. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 months after the 10-day reckoning, Bianca stood in Ravello's dining room during the restaurant's grand reopening. The bullet holes had been repaired, the blood scrubbed from marble floors, the shattered crystal replaced. On the surface, everything looked exactly as it had before the night that changed everything. But Bianca wasn't standing here as a waitress anymore. She wore a tailored suit instead of a server's uniform, an earpiece connecting her to Leon's security network, her trained eyes scanning the room with professional efficiency. Table 7, where Elena had nearly died, where impossible choices had collided with brutal consequences, now hosted a business dinner Leon was conducting with legitimate associates. Bianca watched the patterns, cataloged the faces, assessed the threats that didn't exist tonight but might tomorrow. She was visible now, purposeful, belonging to something larger than survival. Leon caught her eye from across the room and nodded once. Acknowledgement, respect, partnership. Elena sat beside him, laughing at something one of the guests said. The laugh was real, even if the healing underneath it remained incomplete. She was trying. That was enough for now. In the kitchen, Robert worked the logistics board, managing deliveries and inventory under the supervision of Leon's operations manager. Catherine answered phones in the reservation office. They were here because their daughter had decided that understanding their impossible choice didn't require excusing it, but it did require giving them a chance to prove that survival wasn't all they valued. Bianca moved through the dining room, no longer invisible, but no longer hunted. The ghost who'd spent 3 years running had finally stopped. Had finally found something worth standing still for. Jordan would have approved, she thought. He'd always said she was at her best when she stopped hiding and started fighting. The restaurant hummed with conversation and clinking glasses. Danger still existed in the world. It always would. But tonight, in this room where violence had once exploded and lives had shattered, there was only the careful reconstruction of something that looked almost like peace. Bianca Walker stood guard over it all, the woman who'd whispered a warning and changed everything, now ensuring that the empire she'd helped save remained protected from the shadows she understood better than anyone. She'd stopped running. She'd found her home. And she would defend it with everything she'd learned during 3 years in the darkness. The ghost had become a guardian. And that made all the difference.